so we'll jump in there. Remember, Chapter 7 deals with political participation. What was the number one way that most citizens participate that we discussed Monday?
Voting.
Voting, that's right. And what is unique about the United States, if you recall, is that we are fairly low down the table of statistics when it comes to countries that have democracies where you can vote. We are fairly low compared to other democracies. But as we talk about these other ways that citizens can participate, it reverses. The United States has more people, more citizens involved in campaigning, for example, campaigning for a candidate or campaigning for legislation to be passed. And so that's an interesting little tidbit that we have a lower voter turnout, but we have a higher percentage of citizens doing these types of things here. A part of a campaign or getting in contact with your elected officials, being a part of an interest group, whether it be a local group like the local PTA, Parent Teacher Association, or a state group like the Oklahoma Sheriff's Association, or a national group. And then we have, in America, we enjoy the freedom to protest. That's what an unconventional political act would be. We have more freedom to protest, and so we see more of that in our country. So that's what we're going to be looking at right here today, these other methods of participation. And you have that broke up into two groups. You have your conventional, or what we would say are your common ways to participate. Which voting would fall into that, but we've already talked about that. But again, corresponding or contacting your representative or senators, and that would be through letters or phone calls. And you can even go up to the state capitol. Here's an example for you that some of you may be familiar with. This is something that I think you all know that from my personal information, I'm a pastor of a Baptist church, and all of the Baptists in Oklahoma can participate along with other Christian groups or religious groups in the state. The second, or maybe the first Tuesday of February is called Rose Day, and it's a day where we travel to the convention, the Capitol, and it's organized at a state level, and so people from all over Oklahoma can go, and they have like a place where there's a registration table or a kind of a headquarters, I think like on the third floor of the Capitol building. And the primary emphasis is you take a rose and give it to your state senator or your state rep. And it's a symbol of we support life. We're against abortion. So that is one way that, at least in Oklahoma, citizens can have a personal contact with their reps or senators. Forming interest groups or joining an interest group. And then, of course, financially supporting a candidate or their campaign or one of those interest groups. Money is always welcome in political life in our nation. Unconventional methods that we'll talk about are basically are basically broken up into two categories. You have political movements, and then out of political movements, because you can have several different things, like you can have a protest, you can have a rally, which is what Rose Day is. It's a rally for life. You can have marches. Some of you probably remember, maybe some of your teachers, not this past April, but the April before, there was a big teacher rally at the state capitol for education. So there's rallies, marches, protests. So those are all part of a political movements or social movements. And then the second thing that is an unconventional method comes out of a political movement, and that's when a protest movement becomes really, really large. A past example would be the Boston Tea Party. But other things that might happen are like people camped outside of President Bush's ranch in Texas to protest the Iraqi war. So we'll talk about conventional and unconventional methods, starting now with the conventional methods. And looking at this picture, what is the method here that's presented? Anybody? Bueller? What is the method of participation that is represented in this picture? They're not voting. What are they doing?
They're campaigning.
They're campaigning, right. This is campaigning. And there's a lot of things that a campaign entails, such as calling people personally and maybe asking them some questions like, are you going to vote? Have you considered voting for more? What, I don't know his first name, but then the campaign committee of the campaign group, they take the funds that have been donated and use them to print up posters, pay these volunteers who are calling, pay the volunteers to go out and put up the signs. There are some volunteers who go door to door with surveys. These volunteers are gathering information, analysis. So there's a lot of different parts of a campaign strategy. You might have a person that does logistics. They're setting up places where the candidate can go and speak to people, you know, go to the local senior citizen center, go to the Veterans Day service at the school, whatever it might be. You guys have probably seen some of those types of things. So campaigning. And I'm not sure about the numbers on a campaign, but obviously you're going to have probably hundreds of people involved in, for example, President Trump's reelection campaign committee. And then you'll have state campaign groups for Trump. So there will be a campaign group in Oklahoma for Trump. So you're talking about thousands of campaign volunteers for the presidential election. And then it's just going to get slowly, the numbers will decrease for state elections and then county elections and so forth. So here's some other things that they do. You know, they create campaign buttons to give away, and they've been doing that ever since the early 1800s, at least. You can see some of the different buttons there. My in-laws live in Leflore County, and they have been very involved in politically, and they have collected over the years campaign buttons. It's a really neat collection to look at. Here was a campaign poster for Trump back in 16, and Trump styles himself as a winner, so he used a George Patton quote and then highlighted some things that he will do. And then, of course, the last thing here, he will make America great again. That's become his slogan, make America great again. My understanding is that for the 2020 election, the new one may be keep America great. So we'll have to see. Just curious, anybody ever done some campaigning? Maybe not yourself, but maybe your parents did some campaigning for somebody and you helped them. Like maybe your parents put up some signs in the county or in town, or someone who did that.
My dad let someone put a sign in their yard to like vote for them or something.
Okay.
I don't remember the name. It was an old guy.
The thing to do for the 2020 election is I'm gonna guess that the majority of Arcoma and Panama is probably going to be Trump. I'm just guessing. So if you want to have some fun, get like a now I'm not saying you have to do this, but if you wanted to have fun, right? Get a campaign sign for like Elizabeth Warren. Put it in your yard, but booby trap it. Now you don't want to hurt anybody, but have you seen some of those videos where people were trying to steal the Trump signs and they had like glitter and glue fly on them, or the person grabbed it and ran and tripped? Anyway, I'm not saying you should do that, but it could be fun, you know? Videotape it and show it to your government teacher for a little extra credit, maybe. No, I'm just kidding. You guys won't have me in 2020, so we won't even go there. All right. I digress. All right, so now we will go to one more thing that these people do, which your textbook mentions, but I wanted to clarify it because it can be confusing. For example, if these people go out and go door to door, or maybe they attend your community's local Veterans Day parade or Christmas parade, whatever it may be. And they're going through the streets and handing out more tracts or campaign flyers. And they're saying, support more, donate to more. What they are doing there is they are lobbying for your support. So a campaign for a candidate can lobby for that candidate. But what I want to make clear is that that is different than what we're going to get into in Chapter 9, which is about special interest groups that are basically professional lobbyists. For example, the National Rifle Association is a lobbyist group. So when you read that in your textbook, remember that difference. So our textbook mentions a fairly new way to participate in politics, and that is through the internet, especially today through social media. I took this snapshot today of a public group that supports Beto O'Rourke, a former Texas representative who really got famous in 2018, even though he got beat by Ted Cruz at the state level. He is now running for president. Now, this group is a it's a public group, but not started by, it's not an official Beto O'Rourke campaign. This is a Facebook group started by supporters, and you can see that they'll take donations. You send them $15 and you'll get 2 stickers. Woo! And support Beto O'Rourke. Now, if you go on Facebook, you'll find Beto's official page. And so I've also got pulled up here. Do you see Facebook here?
Yes, sir.
So here I've typed in Bernie Sanders, and here's all the choices I have. Here's his official page. But then the same thing here is Beto. You have groups, like this group has 61,000 people.
That's word.
We don't have it on.
Yeah, we can't see it.
That's word.
Okay, hold on a second. Try it again. How about now?
Yeah, now we can see it.
Bernie, okay. So this is a closed group. You have to request to join it. They've already got 61,000 members. And let's see what, okay, on the side here, there's a Bernie swag site that's being promoted. Then you've got local Bernie-crats activist group.
I'm sorry.
Well, I guess I can't see anything else since I'm not a member. So let's go back to, let's check out this group, see if it's open or closed. Okay, here is a public group, and right away they're advertising there are no billionaire donors, right? Because Bernie's all about giving everybody equal pay and equal, whoops, bad word there, sorry. Should have checked it out first. So, whoops, guy in his underwear. Anyway, here's a thing showing what the other Democrat candidates, how many billionaire donors they have. So there's old Beto. He's got 9 billionaire donors already. And this was just 13 hours ago. So anyway, we'll get off of there. Oh, we don't want to watch Starship. We do want to watch Starship?
No.
Oh. Hey, it's a great 80s group. Anyway, you can participate if you're not a real public person, you're kind of an introvert, private, you can participate now through online channels, primarily through social media. There are also online organizations like MoveOn.org, which is mentioned in your textbook. The MoveOn.org group they ran a grassroots effort in 2016 to draft Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts to run for the Democratic nomination. And then when that didn't happen, they moved on to Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton. So plenty of ways to be involved through online channels. And then you can be involved politically if you don't want to campaign, if you don't want to be a part of a Facebook group like Beto O'Rourke 2020 or MoveOn.org, and really you go on social media to get away from politics, you can be involved on a more local level in community involvement. I mentioned earlier the PTA, the Parent Teacher Association. Now, not all communities will call it the PTA, but many small communities have organizations that maybe just are parents or parent teachers working together. But this is where I think a lot of people would rather be involved personally on a local level as opposed to a state or national level. Because you're going to feel like you're going to see results that are affecting you more. You can see the results more clearly than maybe a national or state level. Here's a group there in your county that I looked up, the Florida County Cattlemen's Association. So what kind of group do you think this is? What are they, what is their purpose? What are they trying to achieve, you think? I would say they're not doing anything for the school system. Cattle, and more generally, we might say ranchers, farmers, groups that we would say are rural groups as opposed to urban or city groups. But primarily, it would be a more agricultural group, specifically those that are cattle ranchers. And you can see that this local group, this county group, is working in association with a university that used to be called Oklahoma State or Oklahoma Agricultural and Mechanical College. So, and they have a great veterinary program. So you have a county group that is getting assistance from a state university, and individuals in this county can be a part of it. So you can see there the community involvement on different levels. Other examples might be when I was living in Poteau, we, and maybe some of you can tell me if it's still there. We started around the year 2000. Citizens in Poto started what was called People Against Substance Abuse, or PASA. And every now and then when I go through Poto, I look to see if the signs are still up. But it was when the meth problem was really starting to blow up and get out of control. And so these were just citizens who were banding together to do something about it. So that was a situation that the local group formed to address a certain problem, a specific problem. But a lot of times you'll have groups that are civic groups, like maybe the Lions Club, business groups, like the Greater Arcoma Chamber of Commerce, right?
Not so, sir.
Okay, maybe that's the Greater Fort Smith Chamber of Commerce. A lot of our communities, especially being in the Bible Belt, there's a lot of religious related groups that work together or form to deal with issues. Also in the late 90s, I remember in Poto, a guy was wanting to, you guys know when you come into Poto from Pacola, if you look on the new bypass, well, it's about 10 years old now, but if you're coming in on well, you have to come in on the bypass. Before you get on the bypass, there's a big building on the left, and it says Stampede. Have y'all ever seen that?
Yeah.
So in the late 90s, some guy, I think out of Texas, he was going to open that up and make it like a Roadhouse type of place, if you've ever seen that movie Roadhouse.
Yeah.
With Patrick Swayze.
Yeah.
So the Stampede was going to be like that. And the local churches in Poto worked together, Baptists and Methodists and assemblies, and basically got it stopped. That's why that building has been sitting there for 20 years with Stampede on it. So that's why I think a lot of people think that, or a lot of people will get more involved on the local level because they feel like they can make a real difference, where they can see the tangible results. So any questions on those conventional methods of campaigning, social media or internet participation, or community participation?
No, but are you going to be putting this, like, all these slides up on Blackboard?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, we got 10 minutes, and we're going to look at the unconventional methods, which, if you'll recall, I said was a big political movement that gained steam, like the Boston Tea Party of December 1773. What were they protesting? Taxes, right? And they threw into the harbor what the British government did was they taxed tea makers in America so highly that they couldn't make a profit. And then they brought in all this tea from the British East India Company and were selling it at a higher price. And so on this night, you had a couple of ships sitting in the harbor with all this tea. And was it Native Americans who did it?
No.
No, very good. Americans like Sam Adams before he started brewing beer. I guess he saw the tea going to the harbor and he had an epiphany. Why not make beer? I don't know. But anyway, American citizens dressed as Native Americans throwing, I'm wanting to say, I think it was like 240 tons of tea. Anyway, that was a protest. We would call that an act of civil disobedience. Now, some of the past protests or political movements, have been the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. Very successful movement that led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Act of 1965, and also the birth of affirmative action. More recently, we've had Black Lives Matter crop up just in the last 5 years. I did not get something correct here. Oh well. Other past movements, which maybe you haven't heard of, but also in the mid to 60s and mid 70s, was the National Welfare Rights Movement. And it primarily was to improve welfare benefits, at first for women and children, but then African Americans. A more controversial movement, and really we could say morphed into more of a protest, was the Vietnam movement, or the protest of the Vietnam War. Here's the more recent, the Black Lives Matter should be down here, but here's the more recent protest movements. The Tea Party movement, which began April 15th, 2009. Why is April 15th significant for this beginning date? Say again?
Nothing. We're not sure.
Okay, well, you guys will soon be having to worry about that day, but your parents probably start stressing about tax day, April 15th. So the movement was started on that day in 2009, and they also took the name Tea Party to tie into the Boston Tea Party, in which they were protesting taxes. So this movement started, and it was primarily a Republican movement to protest high taxes. And this movement really gained steam to where there were around 150 Tea Party Republican candidates. So you might have a state election where in the Republican in the Republican primary, you might have a Republican, let's say, for example, a governor race, and there's a Republican governor, and he or she is running for re-election, but there's a new Republican that's going to try to take the governorship away from that person, and that Republican, that new one, says, I'm a Tea Party Republican, which means basically I'm even more conservative than the Republican governor that's running for re-election. So the Tea Party Republicans were much more farther to the right. And even though they're still around, it's kind of fizzled a little bit. You don't hear much about it. Then another recent protest was the Occupy Wall Street protest. That was one that appealed more to Democrats. And it was basically a protest against the top 1% or the wealthiest 1% in America versus the other 99%. And of course, the top 1%, Wall Street's important to them. They do stocks and trading and things like that. So this was a protest about the really big money people and there being more fairness to the other 99%. And of course, something like that would be embraced by a socialist group. Shut down capitalism and fight for socialism. So you don't hear much about this group either. They did not achieve as much national success, or maybe I should say institutional success, like the Tea Party did. The Tea Party, like I said, had about 150 Republicans. You didn't really have a lot of Democrat candidates stumping on, I'm an Occupy Wall Street person. They might say, because one reason would be a lot of these people running are in that top 1%, right? For example, did you hear about Bernie Sanders last month? He was saying, I'm going to put in a $15 an hour minimum wage.
Oh,
And everybody's like, yeah, everybody gets $15 an hour at least.
no.
But then, did you hear what happened? Somebody pointed out that he wasn't even paying his campaign volunteers $15 an hour. They were getting paid maybe a little bit more than minimum wage. So immediately he started paying them minimum wage or $15 an hour. So this last graph shows you, this was a good one. I liked it. This is basically a pyramid that shows you the hierarchy of how people get involved. And it basically breaks it up into three categories. People who just stick to voting and maybe talking about politics. Maybe you'll wear one of those buttons every now and then. They are the spectators. Those who maybe will contact somebody like their president or their senator. Maybe you'll donate some money. Maybe Beto O'Rourke is in the area. You'll go listen to him speak at a rally. These are transitional activities. And then your gladiators are those who join a campaign effort. They run for office. They actually become a mayor or city councilman or state rep. So this is a good visual of kind of the levels of participation. It'll be more people down here, less up here. But once again, in America, we have a higher percentage of people on these higher levels involved more closely than other countries where they have more voting. So any questions on the conventional ways besides voting and the unconventional ways of participating in politics. Okay, so I'll have the video and slides up this afternoon along with the extra credit assignment, and then we'll see you Monday.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Watch out for those criminals in Arcoma.
They're on the loose.